start in 3, 2, 1. Hey, it is your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. And today we have a special episode. Got a really good friend here with us. And in lieu of Halloween, this is a perfectly timed episode. It's actually November 1st, the day after Halloween. But, I couldn't resist but bringing the mask out. And, what a perfect tie-in to the show and the title, Superhero Unmasked. So, of course, I'll unmask myself. And I am I'm Jay McAllister, the host of the show, and today we have Michael Ashley with us. What's happening, Michael? How you feeling, man?
Feeling great. I like the mask, but I like this even better. And thank you for having me on your show.
Yeah, it gets really hot in there, so I know there was some. You were asking just before whether I was going to wear that the whole show, and while that be amazing, it'd be like allowing me to live out a childhood dream of mine. It's just not very practical. So I don't know, how the writers of the story of the original Spider-Man comics planned this, but in real life, I don't think it's going to be a practical thing to fight crime in a mask like that.
Yeah, I can see that. I think that'd be very hard to do.
Absolutely. So thanks for coming on, man. I know we have a ton to talk about. I've known you for quite a few years now. We met, actually, what did we meet? We met through Provisors. It's a professional networking group that both you and I belong to. And you've always fascinated with me with the ideas that you had, and I wanted to unpack that a little bit more. I thought it'd be really beneficial for other people to hear your story and just kind of get inside of your mind to understand how you think about the world. So give me a quick, intro on who you are.
Sure. Well, I can give you my professional introduction. I'm from the Midwest originally. I'm from St. Louis. I went to school for philosophy, and my minor was in journalism. And I'd always wanted to be a writer, even going back to when I was 10 years old. And so, as soon as I graduated, even before I graduated, actually, I was a reporter. I was a playwright in college, and I had 2 plays performed. I had a company that was short-lived. It was kind of a precursor to Facebook and Craigslist, but aimed at college students. I had that from the years 2002 to 2005. And then I ended up going to film school. So I got a master's in screenwriting. And when I was still in school, sorry, let me silence my phone. When I was still
You're A-okay.
Sorry about that.
I should probably, no, you're okay. I should probably do the same myself. So let me do a quick, okay, go ahead. Well, actually, you know what? I'm perfect. The universe has spoken. Perfect opportunity to dive a little bit deeper. Did you say, so you beat Facebook to the market? It sounds like you had some type of social media and platform involvement, or?
That's probably a good way to just stop it there, just to understand this. So yeah, when I was I just finished my undergrad, and my roommate, who was also my best friend, had a concept. It was called Muhookitup.com, as in MU, where we went to school. And we had a website. This was back in, I think we launched it, I guess, in 2003. This website allowed you to buy and sell textbooks from other students, find housing, find jobs, even find romance. And if you can imagine, nowadays we take it for granted that you can do all these things online, but it was actually quite a hard sell to a lot of these businesses, although I do feel fortunate that we had at one point about 30 or 40 different businesses in Columbia, Missouri, who were all advertising with us. And we had this platform, and not only that, but we had it in several schools in the Midwest, including Illinois and Kansas. But around the time that we launched this, Facebook also launched. And but that wasn't really even our problem. The real problem was banks were reluctant to do e-commerce back then. Nowadays, everything pretty much runs on e-commerce, but they weren't willing to give us a credit line and allow us to process payments. And I probably could have gone further with this idea, but I also realized this wasn't my passion. I was actually doing this to create enough money so that when I went to Hollywood, which was really my dream to be a screenwriter, that I would have funding so that I could create the movies I wanted to create and wouldn't be at the mercy of the movie studios. But after a few years of this, I decided to put that on hold and go to film school, and that's where my life took a very different turn.
Yeah. So with this whole concept of the e-commerce, I mean, this is a a brand new idea at the time. Like you said, nowadays, I mean, I just purchased, made an Amazon purchase right before I jumped on this call. It'll be here tomorrow, by the way. It's just the speed of the Amazon network is incredible. That'll be a separate episode if you know Mr. Bezos. I know you're well connected. He'd also be a good guest as well for us here. But so with the entire this concept of bringing e-commerce to the market and being able to process payments, you ran into a hurdle. So this was the banks not wanting to extend a line of credit for your organization, or what was the challenge that you ran into there?
Well, what had happened was we were doing pretty well at the time. I had to, so back then I worked in a factory at night. I worked at a rubber factory actually, making rubber materials for cars. I think my shift was 8 p.m. to 8 a.m. to support this. So, and then Mike, my partner, he was working too at different jobs. We had enough money coming through between our two jobs and getting advertisers to support this. But when we went to meet with banks about trying to get money to go through the site, they said no. Eventually, we met with a group who wanted to help us take it to the market and to help us find angel investors. But in order to do so, we were looking at having to put up another $75,000 in capital. And at the time, Mike and I just didn't see eye to eye on this project, and we decided to go our separate ways.
Oh, okay. So the tale of the two Mikes. It sounds like they're both you and another Mike who were the co-founders of this business venture. Yeah, I mean, like what kind of what I guess what was the catalyst? What makes you think of an idea like that at a time where it's such a strange concept to be able to transact with strangers online? I mean, I'm just trying to put myself back in that time, 2003, right after 2 years after the events of 9/11, a lot of mistrust happening in the world, and you had this idea where you wanted to conduct business and transfer funds via online networks, especially at a time where we don't have the same security protocols we had today. So what created this idea for you?
Well, I think back then, I mean, we were extremely ambitious, and Mike actually often joked he wanted to rule the world. And so for us, we saw this as a means to an end. He's a computer engineer, I was not. And so he had that background and he knew a lot more about the programming side of it. But both of us shared the same interest that we saw this as we would make this company, perhaps sell it, make a lot of money, and do a lot of other different things. Both of us knew that we weren't interested in necessarily, like I wouldn't have once been Mark Zuckerberg and running a Facebook empire for the last 20 years. That wasn't what we were trying to do. We were trying to do this to
Mm-hmm.
make a lot of money very quickly. And in fact, it's kind of funny to think about this now. Back then, I was even working on a project to try to do what Google eventually did, which was to digitize all of the world's writings and literature and books. And so we were thinking about all of these things back then before they ever came to fruition. And so when I originally started this site, Mike handled the coding and the computing, and then I was the public facing part of it, and I also handled the content. And so the biggest mistake, though, I'll say that we made, and if we did this right, we probably would have lasted longer. I didn't understand the concept of Internet 2.0 back then. So to help frame this correctly, I lived in a town of Columbia, Missouri, big college town, a lot of college bars, a lot of really fun things to do in the evenings. All the places we went to, whether it was Lawrence, Kansas, or the cities in Illinois, we would I would actually collect all the information about the local restaurants, bars, all the clubs, what was going on, and then I would populate it onto the website. Well, Mark Zuckerberg and all those other people wisely realized, don't do the work yourself, have the public contribute it themselves. So if you think about what
Mm-hmm.
YouTube is, it's not like there are all these great studios pumping in content, although that happens to some extent. It's people creating it. So Time Magazine read an article in 2005 that said the person of the year is you, right? Because we're the ones creating this content. If I had switched that instead of having to do all the content myself and allowed people to populate it and allowed them to, more importantly, participate with it and create it, they would have flocked to it in greater numbers and probably would have done better.
Oh, absolutely. And like you said, Google, they took a similar approach when they went to, as far as the digitizing the world's text writings and putting it on the Google platform. They and you're probably aware of this, but if not, maybe this will be something that'll be interesting to you. What I found out is that Google, whenever, like, I don't know if you remember back in the early 2000s, mid 2000s, when the internet was still in its burgeoning stages, especially this Web 2.0 concept, and you would log into your bank account or you would log into a forum online, and there would be a CAPTCHA. People hated the CAPTCHAs, right? And it's like, oh, because you type in the thing and you think you got it right, and you never get it right on the first shot. So what it would ask you to do is it would type in a word that was very clear and legible. It would ask you to type in a word that's clear and legible, and then right after that word, there would be a word that was somewhat hazy, fuzzy, maybe some strange characters. Well, that was actually Google scanned all of the books. Their project was scan all the books in existence into Google, upload that online, and then for the words that Google could not automatically identify and categorize, that's what you were typing in. They were utilizing us, the individual internet users, because we want to log into our websites, and you're typing in exactly what that word is, sends that data to Google, and that's how they were able to upload so many books in such a short time span. I think there was like 5 years, and they had uploaded like 80% of the books in existence in publication. It was through that crowdsourcing concept. So I believe that that's definitely a novel way to do things, and it's essentially free labor, but there's the benefit to the user is that they get to do what they want to do. They get to operate more securely, and now they've elevated that where Google is selling that data to companies like Tesla and keeping it within Google as well for their autonomous cars. I don't know if you've noticed, now the CAPTCHAs are gone. Now it'll ask you to identify pictures of bikes, motorcyclists. Well, that's the feed from their autonomous vehicles. It's not real time, so like nobody's in danger if you answer incorrectly. It's like they're leveraging us to help train the AI networks. Yeah, it just makes it's one of those things. I know there's a phrase for this concept where it's like, man, why couldn't I have done that? It's like, that's such a great idea, and it's so like in 2020, hindsight is 2020, and looking backwards, it just seems like such an easy thing to figure out. So, I mean, I guess what I'd like to know from you is, well, one, Mike, I think, was your partner. So what is Mike doing nowadays after this business dissolved? Did you guys kind of go your separate ways? And
Yeah, I haven't talked to Mike in a long, long time. So we went our separate ways. I don't know what he's doing, actually.
Okay, well, maybe he's listening and he's like, man, we should reboot that concept. Yeah. And then my second question for you would be, so this was the genesis. This sounds like this was kind of your first entrepreneurial pursuit. And then what, I know you were at Mizzou at the time, or in Columbia. Was it Mizzou? Okay. And then what next?
Well, I had wanted to go to film school for many years, and so I applied. At the time, I still had the company, Muhookitup.com, and so I had just come back. I lived in London the previous year, and I hadn't had to have a car in a long time, and I really enjoyed not having a car and being able to use public transit. And so my goal actually was to move to New York. I wanted to go to the Tisch Film School. Unfortunately, I missed the deadline on that. By the time I made my decision to do this, I had missed it. So I ended up applying to many schools, one of which was Chapman University in California, and then I got in. I feel very fortunate that I got in because I had no undergrad basis in film. I did have one course in playwriting, which is when I mentioned earlier that I did 2 plays in college. But other than that, I had no background. So most people, they got into this film school program. I mean, almost all of them have very deep film background. In fact, most of them, their undergrad was in film studies, and they went directly into grad school. But I did not. And I think in the years since Chapman has blown up, it's one of the top 10 film schools in the nation. I doubt I would have gotten in if I applied later. In fact, my second year there, they got $100 million cash infusion, and they really accelerated the school and made it amazing. So anyway, I was very fortunate. I got into film school, and I just knew that I wanted to make movies for a living. So for years, it had been my dream to make films that said something. So I really loved the auteur directors. People like Quentin Tarantino really affected me,
Hmm.
and I thought I wanted to make movies that said something. American Beauty came out not too long before this, and I really liked the idea that here was a movie that would be ostensibly about one thing, but it was about something quite different. And I thought that looking at the success of people like Kevin Smith, who were able to take I've since reversed my opinion. I don't really think Kevin Smith is that great anymore, but back when Clerks came out, I think it was in 95, and Pulp Fiction was around the same time. Here were these people who were really doing something interesting with language and with dialogue. And so I was very interested in this idea about how to create movies that had something to say, and I had a lot of different philosophical ideas that I wanted to bring to them. um, and so I went to film school. Like I said, I was able to have a movie optioned while I was still in school by a big studio, and they were interested in making it. And unfortunately, that didn't actually go anywhere. But from the moment I graduated, I was working in the industry. I worked for the head of the literary department at Creative Artists Agency, in which is the biggest talent agency in the world.
Okay. Yeah, and I don't. Are you familiar with what was it called? I remember when right out of high school, I was looking at film schools actually as a potential avenue for me, and Full Sail University. That's what it was called. Full Sail University. Yeah. So how does that compare with? I mean, I'm not really in that world anymore. Um, right now I do a lot of my own amateur videography, weddings, and I've got a couple short films, but not officially in that world. Got a lot of friends there, but so how does that compare? Chapman, Full Sail, are they a similar format, a similar kind of program where it's I guess for A to Z, you walk in as someone who maybe doesn't even know how to use a camera, you leave knowing all the principles of cinematography.
Well, perhaps that is what they cover there, and I imagine that they do that in undergrad. For my program, I don't know why this isn't silent. Okay, here we are. I have officially silenced this. Um, anyway, I don't know what other programs are like, but I was only in the MFA program that I was in was screenwriting, and so I did take one course on editing, which I was terrible at. We used Avid, and I was not good at that.
Mm-hmm.
For the most part, though, I took screenwriting classes. I didn't take technical classes, except for a few things that I elected to take. I took some production and producing classes, but nothing about, let's say, lighting or cinematography. I didn't take any of those classes. Um, the way that they did Chapman when I was there, the way our conservatory approach worked was they separated people by their majors. So there were producing students, and their classes were largely about either the creative aspect of producing, where you're developing a movie, or it's acquiring funds and actually literally bringing this to life from a technical standpoint, locations, things like that. So we had producing, screenwriting, editing, cinematography, and then the directing portion. And there may have been, I think there was costume design, I think, and
Mm-hmm.
something else, but there weren't many people in those majors. And then the way it worked was there were about 20 of us in the graduate MFA program, and we would bring scripts every week. I believe we did two features and two TV shows, not to mention a few other smaller projects. And you would bring about 10 to 20 pages every week that you had written, whatever the assignment was. And to me, this was the most fun part of film school because you'd have a table read. And so you'd assign roles, much like you would cast somebody, and then you hear your own words. And then, of course, you would pick the people that would be best able to say the words, like you knew who to cast, and they would presumably give your best job of it, and they would make it funny or whatever. If it was serious, of course, it'd be serious. And then they give you your feedback. And what was so nice about the program was you would get that in real time, and then eventually the screenwriters were paired with the directors and the producers, and you would have what they called cycle films created. So I was fortunate that I had two. Some people only got one. I got two. I had two films that were produced and created. You get to see those. You have a screening, and so then, just to answer your question, I wasn't learning some of those technical aspects. I was more
Hmm.
involved in my particular craft, and I think that was the case for most people in Chapman.
Oh, so in your case, when you performed the screenwriting element, and I remember you said there was the two films that you actually got produced. So the school would then use their students in order to produce from every respective discipline, from lighting to, I know there's like grips, camera operators. They would bring those individuals together and then produce your body of work essentially.
Yes, so there was a big spirit of volunteerism. Even me, my background wasn't the technical stuff, but oftentimes I volunteered. I was a grip. In fact, at one time, I drove an 18-wheeler from Orange County through downtown LA we filmed a shoot for Coke, and it was so uh, scary driving an 18-wheeler through LA traffic in
Yeah.
an hour.
Was
That
that
was
stick shift?
it wasn't stick shift, but I had to do it. I think it was 3 hours. I was stuck in traffic, and you're white knuckling it the whole time. I don't want to crash and destroy this vehicle and destroy all the equipment. But yeah, that's how we did it, and they were, I volunteered as well on some of the sets. We had other people that volunteered. Oftentimes, I believe we were given a budget of it was either $7,000 or $10,000, and this was back in 2007. So it went further than it would today, and then people put their own money into it as well.
Okay. So so tell me about how this impacts ultimately the choices that you make down the road. I know that now you're a columnist with Forbes, you're a columnist with entrepreneurs. Is it? I was just looking at my list here. What is Entrepreneur Magazine, and then I know you stayed on board with Chapman. You're doing some adjunct. You're an adjunct professor there. So how did this affect and ultimately create the necessary conditions for you to pursue these other avenues where you could continue to tell stories?
Oh, sure. By the way, I'm not a professor there anymore. I was a professor there from 2020 to 2021, but I left my position. Nothing against Chapman, but there was so much going on with my career that I wanted to focus on that. Yeah, so what happened with
Yeah.
me is I graduated in 2007. Like I said, I immediately began working at CAA. So for those who don't know, CAA is the biggest talent agency in the world. And when I was hired on to be a reader, my one of my friends from film school, her name was Karen. She was working for the head of the literary department. She was the assistant to that agent, the head agent, and they call it coverage is the term in the industry. And so I had worked for a producing studio, Cindy Cowan Entertainment, for the 2 years I was in school. You only have to have an internship for one semester, but I loved working there, and Cindy was great. If you know the movie Very Bad Things, great comedy from the late 90s, they did it. So I did coverage for Cindy. Essentially, what it means is you read a script and you give your feedback. But first, you have to give a synopsis because agents are notorious for not wanting to read scripts. Even if they're only 80 to 100 pages, they're not going to read them. So you would try to summarize the screenplay, or it could be a book too, within 3 or 4 pages, and then give your comments, your analysis, whether or not it should be produced and developed. And so I had a couple of years of experience, and I gave my samples to her name was Kathy Tarr, the head of the literary department. She liked my samples, and she hired me. Now, back then, we were in the midst of the writer's strike, and it was a very difficult time to work in Hollywood. But they loved my coverage. In fact, they loved it so much that Richard Lovett, who was the president of CA, would request me to personally do his coverage for different projects. So it went really well. And my friend, who was my roommate, actually, we went to film school together, and yet he just paid for a whole lot of graduate education. He decided to go to law school right after we graduated and add more, a bigger loan. But anyway, when he was doing this, he met someone named Sherry, and she was a former executive with Disney, and they were looking for some new ideas for their next big movie. And so they were taking six new screenwriters, three guys, three girls, to be in this program, and they got to work with the president. And I submitted my samples of coverage I did for CAA, as well as some other scripts that I wrote. I didn't mention this earlier, but I was nominated for Best Screenplay of the Year of my class. I didn't win it that year, but I was still nominated. So I sent that over to Sherry. She liked what she read, and I got in. I was one of the guys. And I got to work with Gary Marsh. And at the end of the week, they bought one movie idea, and that was a treatment that I co-wrote. It's called Girl versus Monster. It was a big
Mm-hmm.
success for Disney. Launched a kids' clothing line, toy line. Olivia Holt stars in the movie. Back then, I was splitting my time between working at CAA, an insurance job, and then writing in the evenings. And I got an agent out of this, out of selling the movie to Disney. I was able to leave my day job and then transition out of that. But to go into your question, because I had to set this up, what I personally found was even though I got some pretty cool assignments beyond that Disney thing, I got to co-create a science fiction TV show with J.J. Abrams, lead visual effects designer. I got to write the scripts for a few different actors. I found that I didn't like what I was creating. I felt like it was vapid and meaningless. And like I said before, I had a vision for when I came to Hollywood that I wanted to create movies that meant something, that had something to say. And I didn't feel like I was doing that at all. And so I met my wife in film school, and this was in 2015. We had just had our first child. I had just done a book project out in Marin County, and which allowed me to expand my writing abilities. I didn't go to school to write books, but I'd written a children's novel, a quite long novel, two of them. They were about 80 to 100,000 words. So I had experience with that. I was also a magazine columnist with Newsbase. And my wife said, because I was thinking about getting a job somewhere and thinking about what to do with my career. And she said, well, why don't we start our own creative content company, which is pretty risky since we just had a baby. But we had connections in the Bay and LA and Orange County and San Diego. And so I decided to do that. In 2015, we opened our company, and it went really well. What I found was I was always a novelty at all these networking groups. People always wanted to come up and talk to me because mostly people would be professionals like lawyers and accountants and financial advisors, but there weren't creative writing folks there that could help people become thought leaders. It just wasn't. No one ever was doing that. And
Yeah.
so immediately the company was very successful from the very beginning. And I began writing books for many different people. And so by at this point it's been about 7 years from now, I've written nearly 50 books for my clients on a range of different subjects, from artificial intelligence to divorce to telehealth and now the space industry. And that allowed me to be a columnist at all of those places. And to bring it all full circle, I'm really glad that I did make that decision to leave the industry. I don't agree with what the kinds of films that Hollywood is creating now, and I could go into that if you want me to expand on it. But I think I really am making a difference in people's lives by putting out this content, by writing these books, by being not only making other people into thought leaders, but becoming a thought leader myself. And I feel like even though it wasn't the direction I initially set out, it's the right one. And screenwriting very much informs my writing. I use a lot of the things I learned in film school in my
Mm-hmm.
writing now. So even though I do some things tangentially related to Hollywood, I just placed in a competition for a screenplay, and I had some projects in 2020 that we were working with Disney with, and presenting and pitching to them. And I may come back to it, but for the most part, I'm happy that I transitioned into more publishing as opposed to screenwriting.
Yeah, I mean that's just such a great depiction of. I mean, the best laid plans often go awry, and what do you do after that point? And when you find that, in life, typically things don't go as we plan, and when you find yourself in that position, how do you pivot or create a better scenario than if I guess the friction had never happened at all? So it sounds like that's what you're doing. now you're creating work that's really impactful. It speaks, it's telling a story, rather than just being content that's made for thoughtless consumption. You want to really create content that makes people think and allows you to give a unique perspective, share a unique perspective, both your own and from individuals who maybe don't have the skills to be able to put their thoughts into a compelling story that can actually get them in front of the audience that they want to be in front of. So, I just wonder, with the process now of you're co-authoring several books, publications with individuals. How does that? I guess I would imagine you probably have to become pretty well versed in many categories that maybe are not your forte, or they're not what you went to school for, or something that you've been surrounded by to be able to gain context about it. But how do you go about that process of hearing someone's idea, finding out what the real plot or the story elements are, and then putting that together with them, crafting that unique perspective that allows them to tell the story that they want to tell versus the story that they think they're telling?
Sure. Well, I think might help to explain it this way. When I was in school, people used to joke and say, "Well, it's ridiculous that you're getting a philosophy major. Why don't you get something more practical? Why don't you get a business major?" And what I found was the benefit of having a philosophy major, much like having any kind of humanities major, is that it allows you to think. And so I've always been a voracious reader. I've always been interested in many different subjects. And so I'm constantly reading 6 or 7 books at a time. And so when it comes to subjects that I don't know well, I have some familiarity. Usually it's some passing familiarity with it. But the other thing that I do is I play a role really when it comes to bringing these books to fruition. I did some acting. I had a video TV series actually. I skipped over this part because there's a lot that happened in my Hollywood entertainment days. But I had a TV series too. So I'm used to doing acting, and basically I'm becoming an actor in these roles. When I meet with my clients, not only do I help them put forth their vision, but I use 2 different things that we've talked about so far. I go back to using the reporter capabilities that I had from going back even to high school, because I was a reporter in high school too. I'm always asking questions, and then I'm using that to tell a story, like I learned in film school. And then once I interview my clients and I'm learning from them at their feet and getting all these ideas, I become them in some ways. When I'm writing for them, I feel like I know their voice and I know how they talk, and so I feel like they're almost I'm channeling them through myself to get that out there, and their voices are constantly in my head, and so in that way I'm able, I think, to both learn what they have to say, bring in my own spin to it. In fact, what I would say is, to go back to philosophy, there's an idea called the Hegelian dialectic, and it's pretty simple, but it means you have a thesis, an antithesis, so you have an idea, its opposition, and then synthesis. You bring it together. So you think about this when it comes to my clients and me. They have an idea, and then I bring some of my thoughts to it, and then together we create something that's greater than the sum of its parts, and that's what we're creating together.
Okay, so this is really a collaborative process. It's not all their input. It's not all your input. It's creating the best of both worlds by melding your thoughts, your storytelling abilities with their technical knowledge on a subject, and being able to pull that together to create a better end product at the end of the day. So, I mean, storytelling is something that, I mean, obviously I think you've figured out the formula for being able to bring storytelling into your day to day. Just in conversations, every time I talk with you, it's always a very engaging conversation, because there's, it's like you drop a crumb at the beginning, you work your way through. It's like, I feel like it's almost a movie plot. There's the rising action, right? There's a conflict, there's a resolution. It's like it follows that cadence. So, with communication, I would imagine and storytelling becomes really important even in a business setting. And why do you think, so many people get it wrong? I mean, is it just there's a lack of awareness about how to communicate effectively? And I mean, humans are, we're social creatures, and we typically learn best from stories. Rather than just rote memorization, if you can tie in a story, some conflict, an overall theme or message, we tend to remember those things better. So I'd imagine even the professional who wants to be top of mind to individuals who may be able to refer business to them, they want to be remembered. Yet so often, you know, and I know I've heard this. You've probably heard the same. Someone who's in a very technical profession will just word vomit all of the technical aspects of what they do, and it's not done so in a compelling way that really creates that stickiness for their audience that they're looking to attain. So why do you think so many people get it wrong?
That's a really good question. I think there are many reasons that people get it wrong, but I would say the simple reason is I don't think that people are taught well how to do this. And I'll even say for my own sake, I didn't leave film school just perfectly knowing all of these things. So I'll give you an example. When my first year out of film school, when I was working at CA, I had an opportunity to pitch to Kathy, who's the head of the literary department, and Karen set it up. And so I pitched to her for 10 minutes, and we did it over the phone, which was, first of all, a terrible idea. I did it on my break. I should have done it in person. So that was mistake one. But the other mistake was I didn't really understand storytelling principles, and I hadn't practiced either. And so here's me coming out of film school, also a person who had done other creative things before. It wasn't like it was my first attempt at this, and even I wasn't good at it. And I had to do a lot of practice work myself and really spend some time learning it on my own, how to be my own version of an autodidact. Because even though Chapman taught me some things, taught me a lot actually, it really wasn't until I began practicing it and putting it into practice myself that I got a lot of these things. And what I mean by that is, I'll take something simple. What I don't just help people write their books, but I also coach them. I don't just write them for them. I coach a lot of people, and I teach people writing. So I taught people students at Chapman, and I also taught a program about how to write your first novel. I'm a speaker with Vistage, and I teach people storytelling. And so I'm always saying to people, you have to show, not tell, character. Okay? And so that was something that we learned. I remember even my first semester at film school, and I didn't really understand what they meant by that. And here's what I'm going to try to explain it right now. I'm sure you've heard the phrase show, don't tell. But if you want to demonstrate who a character is, it is through the choices that they make. Okay? So if I wanted to say, Jay's a really great guy, you should meet him, you may believe me, but you may not believe me, especially if I'm a known liar. But if I showed you Jay is a good person, I showed you by a story about how Jay helped a person who was homeless and didn't know where their next meal was going to come from. Not only did Jay give them the money out of his wallet, but he took them, helped the person find a new wardrobe, and helped him get a new job, and even followed up afterwards. If we went through all of that together, and I saw the decisions that Jay made, but I experienced them alongside of it, it would be a lot more impactful than if I just say, "Hey, Jay's a good guy," right? And so when it comes to storytelling, we need to show, not tell. And that's the number one reason people make mistakes in this. But I think the other reason is this. I think when it comes to business professionals, especially if you're middle-aged, a lot of the imagination, which to me is more important oftentimes than intelligence, a lot of that is beaten out of us, right? So if you go to a playground and you ask kids what they want to be when they grow up, most of them aren't saying financial analysts or account manager at Wells Fargo. Their dreams are being an astronaut or a fireman or whatever it is, right? And so they've allowed this part of their personality, of their psyche, to flourish. But then it gets beaten out of us the older we get, and we get very regimented in our thinking, and we begin doing the same things over and over again. And so not only are we not existing in that creative mindset anymore, but another aspect comes in, and that's fear. When I'm teaching people about storytelling, I often find that women are the best at it over men. And that's because in our society, we permit women to be more emotional. We permit them to talk about their feelings and to be more vulnerable. And those are the skills that you really need, especially in addition to imagination. It's the storytelling. And so, number one, we're not being taught these things. Number two, Society says be a grown up and don't act that way anymore. Number
Mm.
three, we're not in touch with our feelings and the emotional aspect. Really, storytelling is about emotions, and for many men who aren't in contact with their emotions or afraid to inhabit them, it's another reason we're bad at this. So I think all of those
Hmm.
reasons are coming together. But the other thing is too that I don't remember having a course outside of film school where we broke down why stories work. And even the ones in film school, I won't say most of them did this very well. I think that even though we are so accustomed to watch movies and TV shows and we're very used to being passive audiences, we're not used to learning fundamental skills and things like what the hero's journey is and three-act structure and understanding some of those terms you mentioned earlier about falling action. Most people just aren't aware of those things. And
Hmm.
you put all those together, and I think that's why it's such a challenge.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, you said a lot there, and I want to just touch on a couple of those points because I think it's important to bring those to light. Um, so it sounds like operating in that, being comfortable operating in an emotional state can create the it can create a better outcome for storytelling because storytelling is largely involved with channeling and tapping into the emotional side of us. Rather than the intellectual side, the facts and the the hard data, but more so those softer, less tangible items like the emotional aspect of it, and that elicits that response that makes a story more entertaining. So just operating in a space more often, something that a lot, and I'll admit, as a Western male, it's rare that I tap into that emotional state. We're taught to, especially hey, I'm in Chicago, and it's like you gotta go. You don't have time to focus on how you feel. You just need to execute. You need to get it done. Have a plan of action. That can be great in some contexts. It can be great in a decision making context, but one of the things that I've learned, like a mutual friend of ours, Tom Latteray, he's a children's book author, and which actually he's spoken very highly of you and your ability to convey stories. But Tom's day job, he's a sales trainer, and it's funny how those two things really fold well into each other, because he's all about telling the right story. And one of the things that I've learned from Tom is that people often get it wrong when they're not telling the story that they think they're telling. They're making it all about the facts. I think he calls it showing up and throwing up, right? They make it all about the facts, right? The person buying the new car, rather than asking that person about what their value system is, so that you can craft a story that will ultimately get you what you want at the end of the day, which is to sell the car. They go into, well, hey, this is a V8. It's got 400 horsepower. It's got 20-inch wheels. And they miss the fact that that person is an avid, they love Bono, and they want a stereo system that really just rocks. They want that bass to thump, and they want to feel it. They have long flowing hair, and they want to feel the wind in their hair with that convertible top as they're driving down the road. Those are the things that you sell. You sell the experience because you're crafting that story rather than, and those are the same items, by the way. That's the same, the power, the speed, the music, the sound system. Those are tech specs of a car, but just converting that into, to mirroring that to a person's value system. So I think it's really astute that you've been able to figure out this formula with the storytelling formula, and ensuring that it taps into the emotional aspect of a person's psyche.
Hmm. Well, I think there's another part of it too, and I think that Tom is right about this, which is what they call the WIFM, what's in it for me, or the Dale Carnegie School of how to win friends and influence people. I think too often, especially salespeople, aren't proceeding, bad salespeople aren't proceeding thinking about the other person. So, like you said before, the person in front of you may care about a V8 engine, but if you can look at that person, or you can infer that they would much rather be talking about how great it's going to look when the drop top comes down and your hair is flowing, then you want to talk about that. And by a similar token on that, when it comes to storytelling, what the emotion part here is the facts are important, and right, and there is an intellectual capacity. But to me, the facts um, definitely play second string to the emotional aspect of it. If you're telling a story, you want to think about what type of emotion you're trying to cultivate in your listener, your audience, whatever you're trying to reach here. And so let's say you're telling a story about how you help someone save money. Well, then you want to emphasize the pain, right? What was the person dealing with before? How much did their life suck before you got involved here? And so what I often tell people when I'm speaking for provisors or Vistage is to remember that we possess mirror neurons. These are cells within our brains that allow us to vicariously feel what other people are feeling. And so we need to tap into that. And the best salespeople know, and they can tell if I watch you and I'm telling a story and you're slowly backing up, or you're looking around, or you're checking your watch, or doing other things that indicate that you're not into this conversation, that means that whatever story that you're telling right now is not resonating with that person. And it's time to change gears and to think about what emotions you can cultivate through this story, how you can affect them that will keep them engaged.
Hmm. So are you thinking about those things while you're crafting the stories for your clients, authoring these books? Are you thinking about, because I mean, when you're writing a book, your audience is so vast, or the potential addressable audience, it's vast. I mean, it really could be anyone. So how do you create content and is this a consideration that you have to take when you're writing a book to make sure that it is general enough to appeal to the general masses, or is it simply a matter of those people aren't the intended audience and you're crafting the story and the narrative around who you eventually want to pick up that book and for it to resonate with?
That's a good question. Whenever I'm beginning a book project, I have six questions that I always ask, and one of them is, "Who's your audience?" The bad answer is always everybody. You want to be very clear who that is. So I take great pains at the beginning of every book project to be very clear on who we're writing to. And similarly, when it comes to writing articles for my clients, I have a questionnaire, and it begins. The first question is, "Who's our client? Who's our customer?" You need to think about who that person is. But yeah, as you're writing, I think that it's a skill that comes over time. I think some people never get it. I think that some people are born with it too. It's a really special ability, a discernment, if you will. Going back to my philosophy background, Sartre has this idea that we don't know who we are except how we relate to other people. So I wouldn't know who I am if I lived in a vacuum and I never saw another person my whole life. I know who I am because of the ways that I am reflected back to me by the people that I encounter, how I impact them and how they impact me. And it's never ending. We're always impacting each other back and forth. And so if you begin with that mindset and you think to yourself, how is Jay or how is whoever my reader going to react when they read my words or they see the story or whatever? It's a really good beginning starting place. You can go the wrong way on this. You can be so consumed with worrying about how you're going to be received that you are paralyzed and nothing comes of your creative efforts. Now, on the other hand, I went to film school with some people who I probably didn't say it in the nicest terms back then, but I would tell them, you're writing this in such a way that no one else is going to be interested in it. You're making a story for one, audience of one. And I think that's the problem in film schools, especially because you end up watching movies like The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari and all these other highbrow intellectual movies that most people would never watch. It's a small amount of people.
Yeah, I have no idea any of those movies, by the way. Like, I have no idea what you're talking about, but I'm going to take your word that they're very pointed, technical movies that has a particular audience in mind and no one else.
Right. I mean, you can talk about a movie like, a director like Fellini, and they have these very highbrow intellectual movies and, avant-garde French films and things like that, where, yes, they to a certain segment, they can be extremely rewarding and it can be very valuable. But in the same way that you have an engine, let's say you have an engineer and you're at a party with an engineer, and this person may be brilliant at electrical circuits, but whenever he talks to you, you're bored to tears and you have no interest in continuing this conversation. Are you really showing up in a way, and is this person really showing up in a way to have a true conversation, a true meeting of the minds? No. Um, Oftentimes, I felt that people who wanted to create those kinds of pieces of art were selfish, that they were really only interested in I would say artistic mental masturbation, where it didn't really help anybody. I think that you can do both. I think you can have very personal films, very personal books that mean a lot to you, but still affect the wider culture. And in fact, I would say that authors like Cormac McCarthy, who has a very unique style, who writes very dense books that are difficult to understand. The people who have put their time into understanding them, and or even just watching movies like No Country for Old Men that came out of one of his novels, that's a really good example of someone who found a way to show up to the public, to tap into what they're seeking, but to not lose himself in the process.
So how do people find that balance? The individuals that you work with, or just people at large, how do they find the balance of preventing themselves from falling in the trap of focusing too much on themselves and the narrative that they want to tell, regardless of who will be helped potentially by the telling of their story? How do you find the balance between that and being too general, where now it's such a diluted version of your initial vision that you lose the passion to even pursue that project to its completion?
Well, there's no hard and fast answer, and it's something I think that every creative person is always going to struggle with. I mean, even now, if you look at, I think it was Taylor Swift had an album that came out last week, and critics are divided about, the work that came out there. Some people saying that it was very personal, the music that she was creating. Other people saying that that's a facile understanding of it. She's actually being completely disingenuous, and it's really just pop culture. Just look at me, and there's nothing else behind the music. I think the best way that you can begin to tackle this is really comes to your intentions. What's inside your heart? Are you really making an effort to try to help other people, or is this another just an attempt to make it all about yourself? I think if you are, like I said, I don't think there's any foolproof answer to this, but I think if you begin with the right intention, that you're trying to benefit other people's lives, that you're trying to help them to think about things in a way that's not completely self-absorbed, but does have aspects of you in terms of you want your vision out there, but you also are thinking about them. That's the first place to begin. But I think it's also a function of practice. Even now, I will put something out there, whether it's a book or an article, and I'll really do my best to try to extrapolate and try to imagine what the audience is going to feel and try to put myself in their shoes. And I feel for the most part, I get that right. But I don't think that it's perfect every single time. And I think that it's a process of practice. And oftentimes, I think it's even when the creator themselves, they're surprised by it. And I'll give you an example. I was listening to a podcast this morning where a gentleman had created it, and he actually considered pulling this episode he recorded. He didn't think that people would resonate with it, but he did it anyway, put it out there, and it was actually one of the most popular podcasts he ever created. So I don't think there's any hard and fast rules, but I do think it does come down to practice and your intentions.
Yeah, and there are several artists just off the top of my head that I can think of who have gotten that formula right. It's difficult because in your profession you're not allowed that privilege of receiving that real-time feedback to allow those mirror neurons to activate. So you really have to put yourself in the position that you believe your audience will be in and try to understand what the emotional response may be. But like for example, an artist I can think of who's done it really well, Adele. Adele is a very popular artist. She has created her own style that really has become a staple, and she's really doubled and tripled down on that. But I can't help but think, I was watching an interview with Adele, and she mentioned that when she writes her songs, she's writing it about herself, and she's thinking about maybe one particular subject that, someone who wronged her, or a lover from the past that slighted her, and she's writing her music. Her art is really, she's writing it from her perspective for one person. Yet so many people have a shared experience, I think, that even though she's writing it based on her own experience, other people can connect with her work, and they feel that it's a very personal piece of work to them. They almost feel as if Adele is talking directly to them, because she does such a great job of presenting that authentic take of how, of her experience. So, I wonder how this all plays into that concept, where someone like Adele, who is intentionally creating work that is, it's in a sense self-serving. It allows her to voice her frustrations and opinions about people who have either done good things or bad things for her. But how does that still resonate with the audience?
I think there's another aspect of this, which is general versus specificity. When I was in school, we were told that, film school, that it's a mistake to make things as general and as applicable to everyone as possible, because it actually does the opposite. When you get to a point where it's completely generic, then and it's supposed to apply to everybody, it's kind of like communism. It works for no one, right? But the more specific you are, the more idiosyncratic and nuanced you are, be very unique and individual. Well, by nature of that, each of us have our own quirks and specificities. There will be something specific in what you put out there that will resonate with you. And so, going back to Adele for a moment, her getting into the minutia of her life, and let's say someone that betrayed her, a past lover, or being excited about a new love, or whatever her songs are about, and it doesn't matter her, it could be any artist. I was thinking about this actually the other day about, why is it, I'm sure you've had this feeling where, let's say you're about ready to do something, like you're going to compete in a sport, or you're gearing up to give a presentation. Why do we listen to someone else's music and then feel the same energy and the vibes and whatever they were putting out there? Why do we tap into their feeling? Because it's so specific to what we are feeling. We feel like that person is talking for us. And I think if we go back to Adele, or I'm not a huge fan of Adele, but I'll give you a different example for me.
Oh, you're missing out, man. Missing out.
There's a few songs that are okay. But I'm sure she's...
Hello.
Yeah. Let's say for me, Jim Morrison and the Doors. That was a big influence on my life growing up. And here, in a similar fashion, like I don't know Adele's lyrics as well, but if we're going with Jim Morrison's lyrics for just a moment here, they are very specific, and he's quite literary, and he's extremely well read. And so for me, like when I started listening to him, I read his biography at 12. For me, I hadn't had those life experiences that Jim was talking about, but they were so specific and so unique and he painted such a picture with his words that I felt like they were my own in some ways. And it doesn't matter what artist we're talking about, and it could be an entirely different medium. It could be a painter. You could see Guernica and feel like, wow, that is exactly how I feel about war, and to really tap into it. Because I think, just to go back to Star Trek for just a moment, it's not so black and white where it's just we're always either being reflected back to ourselves. I don't think it's that simple. I think there's a lot of give and take. Any conversation, especially this one we're having right now, I'm giving a lot of myself, you're giving a lot of yourself. But it's again like that Hegelian dialectic. There are portions of me, portions of you, and then we're finding our way between the different spots. So when it comes to any artist who's putting out something there, or even just a business professional that's putting out a book there, I think it's a dance. It's a dance between imagining what the audience wants, trying to achieve it and give them that, but then also incorporating your own self into it. And then I think, especially when there's a live performance, it's not just the act of creating it, but then you're getting feedback too. So you're seeing the way that people react. I'm watching you right now. I'm seeing you nod your head at this moment. I'm not only putting stuff out there, but I'm also reacting to what is being put out there based on what I'm observing from you.
Yeah, there's got to be a tie into this in helping the world to move towards a space of unity. It's like take Twitter, for example. And I'm not a big Twitter user, but it's kind of hard to ignore it nowadays when you got people like Elon Musk looking to purchase the platform, and there's just so much divisive content that's being published to Twitter. From my understanding, that's the content that tends to do better on Twitter. As a matter of fact, I heard someone refer to Twitter as this: if you can create content that equally enrages both sides of a particular argument, then that will be a successful tweet, right? So it's like you find a way to kind of needle at everyone. But I wonder if we're looking to create a world of unity to, really become, and I know we've talked about, I know you have an interest in space exploration, and one of the concepts of becoming there's different tiers of civilizations. Yeah, we're going here. So there's different tiers of civilizations, right? And I forget which tier we're in, but basically there's like 3 levels of an advanced civilization, and I think we're in level 1, right? And level 2 means you have to be fully. Let me get this right. When you're a level 2 civilization, you have to be able to create energy and be able to give back that energy to your host star, and it basically has to be you basically have to reach 100% capacity of consuming energy, giving it back. So it becomes, you don't have a situation where your resources are dwindling. You're able to stabilize that somehow. But in order to create a civilization that will, in order to create longevity in a civilization, you have to create an environment where people can exist in unity, and things like wars you can't have, because at the end of the day, the more technologically advanced we become, the more we gain the ability to negatively alter our future, right? And to create a catastrophic event that ultimately would potentially end our civilization. So I guess in creating unity and being able to tell stories in a more cohesive manner, I could see this definitely tying in, giving people the ability to understand others' emotional states, understand others' emotional state, and then being able to express commonalities that you share, rather than looking to just divide, rather than looking to give your take on a matter, being able to weave a story that incorporates your opposition's beliefs, ones that you may believe in, because like you said, nothing is black and white. There are probably, on any particular issue, there are probably things that you agree with on both sides. And being able to marry that into a narrative that allows people to feel understood and heard, which is one of the most important things in effective, healthy communication. The other side has to feel that they're heard. You mentioned earlier, you see me nodding. That gives you that verbal reassurance that what you're saying is resonating, I understand it, and you then feel validated. So I've got to just, I've got to think that this has a tie-in just with being able to communicate in a more emotionally engaging manner by telling stories.
Sure. Well, I have a few thoughts about that. I know where you're going with this type 1, type 3, type 2 civilization idea. And I think actually that's something we talked about in the last chapter of Facebook, is how do we begin to approach one of these type 2, type 3 civilizations. Really interesting things. I guess I would push back on the idea of unity for just a moment, and I want to bring it back to storytelling for just a second here. So if you think about what storytelling is at the end of the day, the key aspect of storytelling is transformation. And the way that you achieve any internal transformation in the story is through external conflict. So let's just talk about Star Wars for the sake of discussion. I'll only go with the original Star Wars, because to me the other ones don't exist. I'm just kidding. Beginning with Episode 4, the first Star Wars, Luke Skywalker begins in what they call the ordinary world, and he begins as a person who's not used to responsibilities. He's clearly not a Jedi. He has not tapped into his latent capabilities. It is only through struggle, through giving Luke that which he least wants, that he changes internally. Conflict is what allows him to grow. Now, I think that there is a well-intentioned idea that we should have unity, and I am for world peace, and I'm against war. But I do think that the idea that we'll ever achieve unity is, first of all, impossible. But second of all, I don't think it's
Hmm.
the right goal anyway. I think the better
Really?
goal would be, yeah, would say something like, um, and I'm just coming up with this on the spot, would be improved assimilation. And what I mean by that is this. I think oftentimes when it comes to debating things, even let's go back to Twitter for just a moment. You had talked about when it comes to Twitter, the things that tend to do the best outrage both sides. So their model is based on attention. Attention is the currency that Twitter and all the platforms use, right? And the wizards over there realize that the best way that we keep people on these platforms longer is if they're upset, if they're outraged. That will keep them on there. They'll keep them engaged even more than being happy, right? So they have an incentive to keep us upset and outraged. And to me, that's, first of all, it's synthetic and it's by design, and in a lot of ways, I think it's quite evil. To especially for young people to spend all this time and to be in these states of anger and hatred and things like that. So I wouldn't say that that's productive conflict. However, there is productive conflict, and we see these in court trials when you allow lawyers to present the best possible argument. Of course, that's what debate is, and people do that in high school or whatever. We goes back to ancient times where people benefited from great orators who would have an idea and someone would argue with them. And even looking at the Socratic method, what is that about? You're asking questions, you're challenging people, you're producing conflict, and at the end of the day, I think even Socrates would say the goal is not that we have unity and we agree on everything, but rather we've come to some better resolution. And that goes back to the positive assimilation, as I was mentioning.
Hmm.
I think
But who?
that
But I
what
guess
we,
I would ask, who is assimilating into what? Like, to me, when I think about the word assimilation, it implies that there's one group that then folds into another group, right? It, like, I don't think of like an equal mixing of ideas, concepts, ideologies. I think of really there's a predominant group who's either the group that's more in power, or a group that has a larger social currency built up, and the other group then melds into that group's ideologies, beliefs. So I guess I would ask, when you speak of that concept of, rather than creating unity, create I think you said tighter assimilation or better assimilation.
I think it's a positive. And by the way, I'm not completely married to these terms because I made up on the spot. But what I meant by
Right.
that,
Sure.
it doesn't have to be homogeneous. In fact, I think that's the mistake. I think it should be probably more heterogeneous. And the idea is kind of going back to the Hegelian dialectic, where you take the best of both, right? I may come to an idea about space travel, and I have a good idea, but it's not totally there. And Jay has an idea that is a little bit like mine, but we find some commonality. And so what I mean is, I think that there's a mistake that somehow there will be this perfect unity and people won't fight anymore.
Hmm.
I don't think that that should be the goal. I think that there's a lot of good that comes out of conflict. In fact, conflict is the whole engine for storytelling. We need disunity to some extent. I think that there's an ebb and flow, and that you find that there are good things about different sides to it. And so I don't believe that violent conflict is going to solve our problems. But I think if we can find a better way to more peaceably engage each other, where we say, look, I have a different view, and we allow the marketplace of ideas to win out, then I think we get better outcomes than hoping that there will be some way that we can all come together. Because to me, I've read enough sci-fi books where they talk about this, a unity consciousness, which sounds nice, but I think that it's close to reality would be enough people recognize and find that they have more in common than they have apart, and they work towards that goal, knowing that there will be, of course, constant conflict and strife, but embracing that is a good thing.
Hmm. So, what do you think are some of the things that create the framework for, I guess, positive conflict? Like, I guess one of the things I can think of, I know that Wim Hof, who is he's famous for his understanding of the human body, physiology, and breathing, and he's got a lot of teachings that he enables people to understand how to help their body to heal naturally, do what it's meant to do from a biological standpoint. But one of the things that Wim Hof is a big proponent of is cold shock therapy, which is, taking a plunge into an ice bath. And the goal with doing this is to, I think for me, it probably pissed me off, but I think what Wim Hof's goal is to create an environment where you create positive stress for the body. Because nowadays, biologically, we weren't designed to live in such a low stress environment. When we were hunters and gatherers, nomadic people, we had to hunt for our food every day. We had to avoid being eaten by the lion. So these were stressors that affected us. And of course, stress has a physiological impact on the body and creates changes in our, the way our brain operates and the way our metabolism operates. There's a whole host of things that stress does to the body. And nowadays, a lot of those stressors are gone. We have such our lifestyle is provides a lot of creature comforts to us, but also it reduces the amount of positive stressors we have. Nowadays we worry about making sure you pay your bills on time, which is a stressor, but a different kind of stressor. It's not that physiological, type stress that you would experience back in the nomadic days. So, one of the things that I can think about as far as a positive stressor would be, just that, like the Wim Hof ice therapy, where you create the stress and then your body comes out more resilient. It increases your immunity. This is, again, what Wim Hof says, it increases your body's ability to fight off infections. Obviously, this became very popular, at the beginning of the pandemic, as people were looking for ways to boost and fortify their immune system. So that's an example of a positive stressor I would think of. But what do you think as far as positive stressors on us as a society? Like, what would some of those things be? And I guess if the goal is not, towards 100% unity with having that diversity of thought, what are some of those things that you can think of that we would want to still have exist as stressors or friction points within our society?
Well, I love this question for a lot of reasons. Number one, I began my day with Wim Hof breathing, and then I took a cold shower this morning. So I'm a big fan of Wim Hof. I want to bring it over to the book Anti-Fragile, because I think he talks a lot. Nassim Taleb, if I'm pronouncing his name right. You can fact check me on that one. I forgot how to say his name correctly. But
hey man, this is a safe space here. We're not going to fact check you. So
thank you.
Now I can't protect you from the internet at large, though. But I will say I stand with you. All right.
Thank you for standing with me. So what he's talking about in this book is very important, and what he mentions for those who aren't familiar with this book is that people tend to think of something as fragile, like let's say a china cup, right? And they would think to themselves, well, the opposite of that would be, fragile would be sturdy. When it comes to human beings, the opposite of fragile isn't being sturdy necessarily. It's being resilient in some ways. And so when it comes to when we're growing up, things happen to us. We fall down, we get scrapes on our knees. Every day, we're actually experiencing quite a lot of resistance. Going back to space for a moment, I learned from writing the space book that I am now that people who go to space need to begin working out almost immediately, because the lack of resistance begins to atrophy your muscles, and it can be very problematic. You need to be working out all the time. So I completely agree with you. I think that what we have right now in our culture, unfortunately, is a culture of safetyism. And we have these snowplow parents who are pushing all the obstacles out of the way of their kids. And the last generation, they were called helicopter moms or tiger moms or whatever you want to call them.
They don't let you say that anymore, I think. So yeah.
They don't let you say that? Well,
I mean, I'll let you say it, but
thank you. What I would say is that this is a big problem. And instead, we should be fostering a culture in which we're developing resilient children, especially. And we need to give them stressors in their lives. The stressors are what allow us to be strong and sturdy. And so, to give you an example, if I hadn't failed, going back to that pitch with Kathy, if I hadn't done badly there and lived to fight another day, I would not have grown in my capabilities. But we probably wouldn't be having this conversation today if I just given up and said, you know what, I suck. I gave a terrible pitch. I can't. I'm incapable of growth. I should just give this up. I would never have gotten anywhere in my life. And I think that I'm a parent of two young children, and it's a very difficult thing. And so I want to say that I don't, what I'm professing here, I'm not going to say is easy because I struggle with it in my own life. Growing up where I did and when I did, I walked about a half a mile to my bus stop every day. After school, I was largely on my own, even as an elementary school student with my friends. We would go out and bike up into bad parts of St. Louis and go out and sneak out of our house and take cabs. Even when I was a teenager, I did all kinds of wild stuff that
Rebel without a cause.
allowed me to be resilient. So I mentioned earlier, I lived in London when I was an undergrad. I lived in London before people were as connected as they are now with social media and all that. My parents and I really didn't talk much for an entire year. I was completely on my own and had to rely on myself to get along. But I had some training, and I was able to be resilient and to deal with what life presented to me. I think one of the biggest things that we can do as a culture is to remember that humans are not by nature sedentary creatures. We are extremely physical. We need physical experiences. Men in particular need adventure. There's a reason why boys are not doing well in school. It's because you take boys at the height of their virility when they should be out running and hunting and jumping around, and we want them to sit very quietly in the corner and fill out exams. This is not who boys are. The founders of this country knew that boys needed male role models, and so the first teachers were actually males. The headmasters were males, and I'm not I'm not condoning corporal punishment or anything like that. But the boys back then, first of all, they were not in school for 8 hours a day. Physicality was very much introduced to their lifestyles, and they were allowed to be and to grow up and to be achieve their full potential. And so what I would say is we have to get away from a culture of safetyism. We have to allow kids to be what they call free-range children, within reason, of course, and we can talk about that if you want to. But we have to allow stressors to occur. That's the only way that true growth is going to occur. As I mentioned earlier, it's not just in storytelling. In life, I often tell people at the end of my speeches that we watch movies and we read books thinking that the heroes are on the page or on screen, but we are the heroes in our own life story. We are living our own stories, and the setbacks and the impediments that happen to us in our lives, the things that we don't want to happen to us, are actually oftentimes blessings that make us into the people that we should be. They cultivate who we are, but we need that resistance. We need opposition. We need conflict to be the people that we want to be.
Yeah, I mean, such a valid point I think you made as far as creating that resistance that ultimately will fortify and make us able to be, I think you said resilient. And I like that word because resilience implies malleability, right? It's not like a I guess I just think from a science, or I'm a big gearhead, so I think of carbon fiber, this material is extremely lightweight, yet and extremely strong. Actually, has a stronger shear force. It has the ability to oppose a shearing force, which is a lateral force, better than steel, while being an eighth or a tenth of the weight. But one of the things about carbon fiber is it's very brittle. It's not good against high-speed impacts. It's good against keeping something it's good against opposing a force. So it just makes me think of, we're humans. We're a biological creature. You don't want to be like the carbon fiber, strong yet brittle. You want to have a little bit of malleability, a little bit of compliance built in, so that way you have the ability to take bumps and to face challenges in the road, but then to be able to assess the damage, rebuild, and then be stronger than you were before. And to me, that's what I think of when you speak about resilience. That's the ideal state of wanting to be in. Yeah. And that makes us better in the end because we can rely upon past experiences and collected data. We can compare that, benchmark it against what's happening in the current, and then we can think about a future state that we'd like to achieve, and we can marry all of those together. Absolutely. Well, hey, Michael, I know we got to wrap up here. We're at the end of our time, but man, it's just you're a wealth of information, and I wish we could go on and on. We'll absolutely, if you'll indulge us, have you on for round two, because I think you have so many ideas. You're truly someone that I respect. You have so many, seemingly so much knowledge in a vast amount of disciplines, and it's probably due to the work you're doing and in so many so many technical professions that you have to interact with on a daily basis. But yeah, I just really appreciate your time coming here, being such a dynamic guest. And if there's one last thing you could say, this is always the big question: highest impact statement that you think will help people to understand not only how you process the world and navigate through its various challenges, but that will help people to be better versions of themselves. What would you tell them? I guess so. You've obviously accomplished so much in such a short amount of time in life, and you've done things that most would think are unthinkable. You have a vast network of people that of individuals that most networks would pale in comparison to. So given all the experience you have working with so many different people and understanding how to tell stories, being able to weave that into you following your dreams and your passions, what advice would you give other people that would help them to be the best version of themselves based on what you've learned along the way so far?
Sure. I actually have, I think is a good answer on this. I appreciate the very kind words. I think that, contrary to what you just said there, I think that for many years I felt quite fearful. I felt fearful about if I was making the right choices in my life. I felt fearful if I would fail. I felt fearful as to what people would say or do or how I would be judged. And I wouldn't say that I'm completely fear free of those fears at this point. But I think too many of us allow fear to rule our lives. And we don't do the things that we want to do because the conventional wisdom says if you pursue this, like for instance my own life, I was told not to be a writer. I was told not to follow the creative field. I was told that I was making a mistake and I was taking needless risks, but my life would not have been what it is, and it would not be as rich and full, and I wouldn't be a happy person, I believe, if I had allowed that fear to overcome me. And I think that we live in a society in which courage is very limited these days. I think if people look back on this age, they may call it the age of cowards. And if you allow me to go on for one more second here, I think that social media is encouraging this because it's encouraging conformity. We watch other people, we see their lives, and we say, well, I should be more like that person. I should not step out of line. But I think the true measure of a life is being authentic and true to yourself and going after your own vision of what your life means. And yes, of course, you shouldn't be willfully ignorant of fears and risks. But at the same time, like I said before, that push pull, that suppleness, it's so important to be courageous and to be brave and to take risks. And I think the things that make us so fearful at the end of the day, when we really acknowledge what they are and we push back against them, that fear that was holding us down, it's not as powerful as we thought it was. And I would encourage people to be brave.
Well said. Well said. Michael, thanks for coming. Take care, my friend.
Thank you.